Welcome back to Science Periodically, the show that provides you with a quick break from home isolation. Getting to know the School of Science is a key component of the show. So this week we have Dr. John Guare. I'm going to apologize if I said that last name wrong. He's from our psychology department, and he is quite the positive individual, which is a great person to have on the show during a time like this. And as per usual, let me kind of introduce myself before we get and go through this week's news. So my name is Dustin Ryder, and I'm going to be your host today. I'm a forensic science and biology student here at IUPUI, and each week I dress as a famous scientist where you guys get to guess who I am, and your name will be entered for a chance to win some really cool science gear. So what I usually do is kind of show you guys who I have as last week. So here we go. Let me pull it up on my screen. There we go. So last week I was dressed as Pythagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician that discovered the Pythagorean theorem. This theorem provides the relationship between the sides of a right triangle, which means you've most likely become familiar with the formula of a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Everyone who's sent in their guesses has been added to a random name generator to choose who the winner is going to be, and that is Ayusha Patel. So congratulations. We will send you an email shortly where you can decide which prize you'd like. And if you do want to be next week's winner, make sure you guys stick around for this week's hint. You'll have the opportunity to choose from science prizes, which include a science beanie, socks, pins, water bottles, shirts, books, bobbleheads, and a card holder for your phone. That photo's up right there, so you guys can get a good look at that. And you guys can submit those guesses to science@iupui.edu. And then on to the news segment of Science Periodically. Our first piece of news is an update on COVID here in Indiana. A collaboration between the Indiana State Department of Health and IUPUI has concluded that the spread of the novel coronavirus in Indiana shows fewer active infections, people testing positive for antibodies. When they were asked why, the lead scientist and IUPUI professor Nir Menachemi said it is likely that the virus has slowed down due to our collective efforts to be safer, engage in social distancing, and reduce transmission by wearing masks and adhering to the higher hand and surface hygiene standards. This is an example of Hoosier successfully hunkering down during the initial outbreak. Be diligent to adhere to any and all measures designed to keep transmission low. That's things such as wearing masks, social distancing, and changing how you shop or act at home. So this is some really good news, but there are many unknowns and we still have to kind of remain vigilant. So let's keep the curve fallen by remembering to be safe and follow the health guidelines. So the next news piece fits pretty well with this week's topic of psychology. So dogs are kind of man's best friend, and I can definitely attest to that. So for many reasons, many people kind of decide to adopt a puppy to grow alongside their family. While puppies can be really, really adorable, sometimes they can be a bit too much to handle, and I think I can definitely agree with that. So new research from Newcastle University in England shows that dogs have an adolescence phase where they temporarily act out like rebellious teenagers. So as they go through emotional changes during puberty. So during this time, the brain's, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is important for decision-making and logical thinking, is still developing, and their hypothalamus is releasing hormones which influence the emotional part of the brain. So during this time, they're kind of more likely to disobey orders from their parents and be a little bit more difficult to train. So thankfully, behavior does, kind of start to improve after that puberty. So that's roughly around 12 months of age. Also, this isn't really quite news, but it's a really important reminder for all of you out there that haven't really registered for your courses. So make sure you guys make an appointment with your advisor to discuss your schedule and courses. Their name can be found on your Student Center page on one.iu.edu. So if you head over to the Student Appointment Scheduler, which is also known as SAS, and click Start to find your advisor, you'll be all set to start to go through all of that. And there's instructions right there on the screen too. And then for our virtual and social distancing opportunities this week, we have quite the variety. A bit of a classic, we have Tibbs Drive-In Theater. It's the last drive-in here in Indy, which shows movies 5 days a week. There's also the Funky Bones, which is just a short drive from the campus at the Virginia B. Fairbanks Art and Nature Park at the 100 acres. You can kind of visit that location and it's actually one of our favorite scenes in The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. So if you've ever heard of that or watched the movie, take a trip on over to the Funky Bones. You can also stroll around downtown or Mass Ave and see how local Black women artists are turning Indy's boarded up windows into powerful works of art to reflect their personal realities and experiences. You can actually see that right there in the bottom right-hand corner. That's one of the examples right there. They're kind of only going to be up for a little bit of time, but if you do miss it, don't really worry about it because they are being preserved and featured in a later exhibition along the Indianapolis Cultural Trail. So that does bring a wrap to this week's news, making sure just make sure you guys are meeting with your advisors and stay safe out there. This week's guest is quite the speaker when it comes to positive psychology. So Dr. John Glaeser is a fantastic clinical associate professor here at the School of Science. John is also the assistant director of clinical training and won the IUPUI School of Science Full-Time Lecturer Service Award back in 2011. So John, I'm going to unmute you real quick. So you might have to do it on your side as well. Looks like you do. So once you have that unmuted, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what classes you'll be teaching this coming year?
Sure, Dustin. First of all, thank you very much for having me on here. I greatly appreciate it. So of the courses I have taught historically, they are things like Introduction to Psychology and other courses like Health Psychology. More recently, I have been teaching Intro to Counseling, and then I also teach an undergraduate capstone course, which is a capstone practicum in clinical psychology. I've also taught positive psychology in recent years, although just so actually I've shifted away from it for right now, but I certainly love this field and I look forward to talking about it with you.
Yeah, we do too. It's definitely a very interesting one. So like you said, you've taught classes in positive psychology. Mm-hmm. So what is it that we're kind of really going to be talking about today? Kind of what is that concept of positive psychology and what made you choose that area?
Well, I'll give a little history that I think is very interesting. So Martin Seligman was a past president of the Psychological Association. And he was weeding in his garden, and he tells the story of his daughter, who's Nikki. I think she was about 5 years old at the time, and he was taking care of the flower beds, and she was just pulling up weeds and throwing them. And he yelled at her, and she looked at her father and said, "Daddy," something to the effect of, "Daddy, when I was 3 years old, I whined every day. When I was 5, I finally decided to stop whining. If I can do that, you can stop being such a grouch."
Love that.
Yeah. And so what Dr. Seligman recognized actually in that moment was rather than focusing on her negative quality of picking and the weeds and throwing them, he said I should really be focusing on her positive qualities, like her social ability to see what she's doing and move in a positive direction. And so that became his mission when he was president of the American Psychological Association, to really started focusing on people's strengths. And kind of related to that in terms of the history is that we've had courses like either psychopathology or abnormal psychology for decades. And now we're trying to balance things off by talking about the good things, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And I always love hearing that story about the daughter. So you shared a comic with us earlier, and it's quite an interesting one. It's called a Ziggy cartoon, and it's on the screen. It seems like basically everything has kind of changed without notice over the past few months with the coronavirus pandemic and the unrest due to the senseless murder of George Floyd. So a lot of people are kind of feeling anxious and or unhappy with all the changes in their lives. And the world and the students listening here today are also about to kind of begin that college journey, which by itself is a huge change. So what would be your advice to college students on coping with stress and the unknowns and staying kind of positive and happy?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think it's important to normalize feeling stressed and overwhelmed and out of sorts during these times. It doesn't make it go away, but we then recognize that when we do feel these things, it's just a reaction to what is going on. And so we don't have to pathologize everything that happens, but to recognize, of course, this is difficult. It's very, very challenging for anybody during this time. And
Yeah,
then
I
I'm sorry.
absolutely agree with that.
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dustin.
I just said I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Yes. No, it's really important. We forget that, of course, we're going to be feeling upset and bothered and disconnected and up in the air. These are very, very unusual times. And so just recognizing that, I think, allows us to see this is the way things are. And then I think the second question is, so what can we do about it?
Yeah.
Yes. So this is where we can get into what UC Berkeley refers to as the science of a meaningful life. I always like that term. And so they do a lot of research and they collect a lot of research about areas in the field of positive psychology. And one of the things we know that we can do to help balance uncomfortable things off is practice gratitude. That may seem very simple, but it turns out that things are around us all the time that we can be grateful for. Just maybe we're still safe. We have food to eat. We have a bed to sleep in, whatever things might be, or it's nice weather, or like you said, we can be walking our dog, or whatever it might be, to focus on these small but good things that are always available to us. Because when we do that, that can help counterbalance the stuff that's going on that doesn't feel so good.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I've kind of always grown up with that. It's always the little things in life that my mom would tell me. And I guess she is pretty right, especially when you can kind of take a break from everything, like walking your dog, or just kind of appreciate what you have going on. So let's kind of touch on the concept of psychological wealth. So my understanding is it goes beyond happiness. So what is it and how can we kind of accumulate it?
Mm-hmm. Actually, the slide we have up now is something a little bit different. I think there's one more slide there. Lori may have
Oh,
that.
here we go.
There we
My
go.
bad.
Right. Yeah, thanks. So this is just an example. I mean, different researchers and people talk about different things, but I really like this pie chart because it shows the areas and the domains. So I'll just start at the upper right, engaging activities, even during, like now, if we can find something that gives us joy, listening to good music, again, walking our dog, walking in nature. So engaging in activities, because a lot of times when we feel down or sad or depressed, we tend to uh, pull back or disengage. So we need to find things that we enjoy doing, and then just, they can be real simple things too. Happiness, obviously, doing some things that give us life satisfaction is important. By the way, Dustin, please jump in at any time when I'm talking about some of these, because I don't want to just go through all of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and so happiness again goes back to finding things that have some meaning in us. We can talk a little bit more about happiness. Health is important, to take care of ourselves as much as possible. Then that allows us to have the most amount of freedom, to be able to go do things that we enjoy. Money is pretty interesting. It's not like we need a whole lot of money to be happy, but if we have enough to meet our needs and take care of the bills and things like that, that's really the overarching goal. Because it's not
Yeah.
like someone with $2 million is twice as happy as someone with $1 million. That's not really how it works.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
It's like once you kind of reach a threshold and you're like, okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Positive attitudes. These are obviously very important and very helpful. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about that maybe when we get onto that other slide, back to that one. Positive relationships. This is really, really critical. Some of the best researchers in the field say every single happy person who they have interviewed has really good support network, which doesn't mean having a bazillion friends. It just means they have at least two or three people who they know that they can rely on, that they can share things with them, that will accept them for who they are. It's really, really valuable. It's one of the best things for mental health and physical health is good social support.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. So actually, so we've mentioned this. Let's go back to that slide. I accidentally went forward too many times. Oh, there we go. So some people kind of believe that happiness is a choice. So can people kind of choose to be happy, or the flip side, choose to be unhappy? Kind of what is that process of happiness? What are the benefits to it?
Yes. Well, uh, Barbara Fredrickson is this real top-notch researcher at the University of North Carolina. And she has this approach, and I'll talk about this a little bit. It's called broaden and build. And so the thing she does and other people do in their research labs, which I think is fascinating, is they can induce positive emotions in people. Um, and so if you do the research, half get a positive emotion induction, half don't. And then they will test them on things. One of the things I found fascinating is they will then show slides of different babies' pictures, and the people who were induced to be more positive looked all around. So they
Okay.
looked not just the baby picture in the middle, but all around on the up and down, left and right. Whereas the other people who didn't have that positive mood induction tend to focus only on the baby in the middle. Now, this may seem a little like, what does this matter? But what she talks about is that when we are in a better mood, we are literally broadening our perspective because they measure this with eye tracking research protocols. So they can see that when we are in a happier mood, we actually are looking around, taking more in, being more aware, and it also helps with creativity. It helps with problem solving. So as you said, it gets into our novel thoughts. So it starts to broaden. So we have more, we can engage in more activities because we have more energy, we're in a better mood, which obviously helps our relationships. People like to be around other people who are positive. So that builds, enhances relationships, that enhances social support. And you can see her upward model there that it all has a nice feedback loop to eventually maybe even help our physical health as well as our mental health.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. I didn't actually know about that study. I was gonna say, I was like, so why is that really important? But when you explain that about the brightening, like kind of broadening your horizons, that makes a lot of sense. So, so that's actually kind of another question. So happiness is definitely different for everyone, but do you think there's like a universal concept of what you need to be happy?
Uh, I don't know.
Like I'm
um,
still trying to figure that one out.
yeah, well, I think a lot of people are. I mean, clearly there are cultural differences as well. And so a lot of, in our society, we tend to look at is I'll be happy when, or if I make X amount of money. So we look at things maybe future oriented, whereas other cultures say, I should really focus on what I have at the moment. And what we do know is if we're pretty satisfied and happy with what we have, it's okay to want more, but we aren't saying, oh, I need more in order to be happy. So we can be okay with how we are and want more at the same time because we're not waiting till the I'll be happy when thing to happen, you know?
Yeah, that makes wonderful sense. I love hearing that. So I kind of want to take it to a different turn here. Let's kind of talk about college students and social media. So we really can't avoid that since we kind of grew up with it. We use it daily. And I look at all the, kind of like perfect faces, I guess you could say, and like nature on all like my feeds. So I kind of always hear that it can have a negative effect on happiness and self-image. So, what are your thoughts on social media and the stigma that kind of surrounds it?
Yes, that's a really good point. I've actually had this exact kind of conversation with students in my intro to counseling courses. And I find it fascinating because they say, I think, which is what you were saying, when they look at Facebook or everything, all they see are their perfect posts. by their friends where they look really happy or beautiful or gorgeous and everything. And they start to feel bad about themselves because we tend to do what's called self comparison. So we see everybody else there looking wonderful and happy, and we forget a lot of the time they're not like that, but they've posted these perfect little things that make us end up feeling bad about ourselves because we can't measure up to what other people are posting.
Yeah, I get that.
Right. So I think just recognizing that, going, wait a minute, they really crafted these things. This is not what they're like all the time. Uh, so I think recognizing that, frankly, limiting the use of social media is really important. They've again done studies. I'll just mention a couple where they've taken a bunch of college students and then asked half of them to limit the social media to 30 minutes a day, and the other half just keeps doing what they're doing. And at the end of a couple of weeks, they do measures like happiness or satisfaction. And actually, the college students who limited their social media reported feeling better.
Interesting.
So, so it's we got to be really careful because it can just grab us. And YouTube knows this stuff, which is why they always have another video clip start to roll right afterwards. They try to find every way they can hook us. And so social media really doesn't have our best interest in mind. It has their best interest in mind. And so we need to know, wait a minute, time out. Let me, take a break and, do something different than just stay on there all the time.
Yeah, I never actually recognized that, especially on the YouTube end, because to me, it's like they're videos more so than they're like still images where
Mm-hmm.
as somebody like me who does photography, it's like you're looking for a moment, which is kind of what you look and see on social media. And I don't really think of videos, but I guess I don't watch YouTube that much.
Okay, yeah. Well, I heard someone speak who used to work for Google, and he said their whole job is to keep users hooked. Yeah. And in fact,
Okay.
another talk I heard where a woman she works for NPR and she was doing interviews, and she was talking with someone who said the social media companies and drug dealers are the only two people who refer to their customers as users.
I guess that's a good point. Never
So
thought of that.
yeah, I know. So
Jeez.
yeah.
So that's actually a good point. Now that we're like talking about the online environment. So we're definitely switching over that, since we are self-isolating, we've got work, social, and like everything on there in the online environment. So what are your thoughts for people that are kind of trying to find supportive relationships online? Do you think that's really possible?
Well, certainly you can get connections that way, and they can be very, very helpful. I mean, just as an example, a lot of clinical and counseling work in response to COVID has switched from in-person to telehealth,
Yeah.
and so that can be very, very helpful. So we can, through video, Zoom or Facebook or whatever the counselors and therapists are using. I've talked to some people who say that they are getting good benefit from doing professional counseling using telehealth. So, yes, something is better than nothing. Uh, but at the same time, and this I find fascinating, there's also a lot of research on touch and how touch is very important. We are mammals. We feel better when someone gives us a pat on the back or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know we have to be careful with social distancing and all these kinds of things, but that speaks to your point, which is that I think we can get some benefits clearly through FaceTime or doing other things that can connect us with people, but also simply being with people. There's a different feel when you're sitting across with someone or sitting with someone and you're really talking and listening and relating to each other. There's a lot of these, soft skills they talk about that are really, really helpful to help us feel like we're really connected to the other person.
No,
So,
I agree with that completely.
mhm.
Because I was going to say, like, as somebody who has done the online counseling because we had to switch to it, it's definitely not the same. I mean, you're going through it and it's like,
Mhm.
you kind of don't feel like anybody's actually there, even though you can like, communicate with them. So it does make a big difference.
Yes, yes.
So let's actually talk about the World Happiness Report. So you've actually mentioned this in the past before. I've heard a couple of your lectures. So that's kind of for those of you who don't know, that's a survey about global happiness, and it showed a significant decrease in happiness and life satisfaction in the past 20 years for adults and adolescents. So the author kind of suggests several things, including the declines in social capital and support, but more interestingly, that Americans are less happy due to fundamental shifts in how we spend our leisure time. So,
Mhm.
what do you kind of think about that?
Yes. Yeah, one chapter that I looked in there was by a faculty at the University of California. I forgot which state university, but she's been tracking this stuff for adolescents for years, and they do actually do samples across the country of happiness levels. And she's noticed that about around 2011, which she said is when the smartphones hit at least 50% of the people in the adolescents in the United States, that happiness ratings started to decline afterwards. Now, this is just like observational information, so you can't say it for sure. We know it causes a decline,
Yeah.
but she was interviewing a lot of adolescents and looking at a lot of information, and she was just shocked by how often people are just stuck on their phones. She actually wrote a book called The iGen, like iPhone.
Yeah.
Um, and she just said, we have changed our ways of communicating from getting together in person, going out on dates, doing all kinds of things, to just connecting on the phone, to the point where she said she was surprised when she said teenagers were telling me, yeah, I go to bed with my iPhone under my pillow every night. So we're so connected to that, almost making that our best buddy or best pal. And while in one way we talked about it can connect us, it's very different than getting together with friends and going out or dating or doing things along those lines. So she just thinks that we really need to pay attention to all this because it may be contributing to, I wouldn't use the word false refuge, the phrase, but it's kind of like this helps, but there's still not the full interpersonal experience of spending time with friends and getting together and doing things.
Yeah. And I think that again kind of touches on what you mentioned earlier about how we've had to switch counseling to, the web or
Hmm.
Zoom or anything like that. I mean, you're kind of connected, but not really. And
Yes.
I'm also one of those guilty people of sleeping with their phone under their pillow.
Yeah.
In my defense, it's more I'm afraid I'm going to miss my alarm.
Yeah. Uh-huh. But
So
it's also surprising though how many times people check their phones during the day.
I'm definitely guilty of that. Once they kind of released that like screen time feature,
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh, I really spend that much time on my phone? Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, this becomes so automatic, we're not even aware we're doing it. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, it's just like second nature now. It's just like, okay, all right.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, I'm totally checking time, but let's be honest here.
Uh-huh. Yes.
I see that notification. So before we do start to wrap up here, because we are reaching the 30-minute mark ish. So what kind of advice do you have for the students that are coming in the fall semester to kind of stay positive and maintain those connections that we were talking about?
Well, I'll just go back to some of the beginning stuff, which seems very basic, but we do know it helps. And that really is, for example, practicing gratitude is really important.
Absolutely.
I mean, just reminding like, oh, I had a bed to sleep in last night. Something as simple as that. And the more we do it, the more we recognize there are good things that we just take for granted. So we really need to remind ourselves of those little things, which oftentimes aren't so little.
Yeah.
One of the things that also people do is like writing a thank you letter to somebody, just to show your appreciation, because it helps the other person. Even if you don't send it, when you write it, reminds us of what that person has done for us, and that can be good help for us as well. Other things was kind of along those lines, but there's this book called Hardwiring Happiness, and they talk about taking in the good, which is looking at all the little things all around us that, and this is by a neuropsychologist, and he says, if we look and we see a sunset, or even if we go back to our own memories of a beautiful experience we had, if we can stay with it. So he said, if you can so he says, have a good experience, like either in the past, you remember it, but hang with it for like 15, 20, 30 seconds and let it sink into the body. So it's not just a head remembering experience, but let it go all the way through so you actually feel it as well. And those things can actually help calm us down, engages the parasympathetic system, which is better for our cardiovascular system. So these are things, breathing, frankly, breathing can be really, really helpful. Just
Yeah.
focusing on the breath in a relaxed way.
Yeah, and actually, that kind of brings up a point. For those of you that are going to be new next semester, we do have what's called CAPS, which is our counseling service here at IUPUI. They actually offer courses or like groups, you could say, or also one-on-one sessions where you can kind of do mindfulness meditation and just a lot of group sessions, which are really cool and a great opportunity. I'm pretty sure those are free to students, unless I'm thinking just the individual sessions. But that's also just something that's really great idea to check out, especially if you find yourself kind of finding it a little bit difficult to be grabbing that gratitude, I guess.
Yeah, and just to also repeat again, especially for students coming in, but this is for everybody, build friendships, build relationships, social support. That is so important, especially during transition time periods too. So we have someone who we can hang out with and we can share stuff with. That matters a lot. Really helps us hang in there.
Yeah, that actually really helped me a lot when I first came to college, because I mean, you never think it's going to be a big thing until you're actually there.
Yes.
Collecting those people and having that support system really helps.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Guar. I'm so sorry if I said your last name wrong.
No, it's Glaeser and you got it perfectly. Thank you.
Awesome. I feel so relieved about that. And it was really wonderful talking to you and getting your perspective on a lot of those things. So if anybody has any questions for Dr. Guar, make sure you guys send them to, I know, I'm pretty sure I just said it wrong. But make sure you guys send it to his email, or you can reach out to us, which is science@iupui.edu. But thank you again, John. We really do appreciate it. Hope you have
Well, thank you, Dustin. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it as well.
Yeah. All right. So before we end this week's episode, let's take a look over the responses for last week's Instagram question of the week. Let me pop it up here and not scroll the wrong way. There we go. All right. Awesome. So it should be showing up on your screen. So our episode was focused on tips and strategies for math success at IUPUI, and the responses were kind of just pouring in, which I did not expect. But many of the responses mentioned the MAC, which is the free math assistance center that is available for all of you taking a math course. I definitely suggest utilizing that resource. They have amazing people that work there, and they have these really, really cool whiteboard tables, which is actually something new, I think, in the last 2 years, but they're really awesome. You get to write on them. So other than the Mac, a lot of people suggested doing the optional homework and just kind of practicing. As much as you might not want to, it really does help. But my favorite tip, however, is struggle times are where you learn the most. You just got to keep going. There's also a really funny one in there. If you see it, it says laminate your notes so your tears just roll off. I felt that. But keeping up with this week's topic of psychology, our Instagram question of the week is a great one. We kind of want to know what makes you happy. And if you haven't already, you can follow us on our Instagram, which is @IUPUI Science. And you can check out our story to see all those answers. Because like I said before, happiness is very different for everybody, but it's always nice to kind of hear what makes other people happy. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this week's prize for guessing which scientist I am is, again, all up to you. On our screen, you can see a picture of all the, oh, wait, nope. I forgot that was at the beginning. This is actually just a picture of the socks that you can see right there. But you do have the option of the School of Science beanie, pins, water bottles, shirts, and even the Science Jaguar bobblehead. So make sure you guys are submitting your guesses to science@iupui.edu. And this week's hint is I am the first woman to win a Nobel Prize and discovered radium and polonium. I just said that one a little bit wrong. We do appreciate everyone that joined today's episode of Science Periodically. So make sure you guys tune in every Tuesday. Next week's episode is a little bit different than what we usually do. So we're going to have science trivia where you guys are going to be able to win prizes. And we're also going to have guests, Dr. Kathy and James Mars, prior to our trivia. So Kathy teaches biology K101, and she's probably one of the most admirable professors here at IUPUI. She's such a sweetheart. And her husband is actually also involved with research using zebrafish for modeling fetal alcohol syndrome. So it's definitely going to be a very interesting episode, but make sure you tune in because you probably guaranteed a prize if you are tuning in. And we do also have our science recruiter, Lori Hart, here to let you know how to reach out to us with any questions you guys might have.
Hi, thank you, Dustin. I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in today, especially with it being a holiday week, and wish everybody a fantastic 4th of July. And Dr. Guare, Dustin and I practiced your name several times, so you know.
It's like you panic a little bit, and then you're like, oh no.
But you know, we're getting there.
The easiest way to remember it actually is just think of the word square, and then it's Guare.
There you go.
Oh my gosh, you're right.
Now
I'm gonna write that down.
Forever. Perfect. But if anybody has any questions that they have, I mean, Eve, about registering, about their major, just about visiting, we're going to be opening up again in August. So if you want to come walk your classes or anything like that, check out our visit page or email me at science@iupui.edu. And I am happy to, give you the answers or find the answers for you. All right. And I just wanted to wish everybody a wonderful holiday weekend.
I will.
Yeah, have a good 4th of July, everybody. And thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you guys next week.
You want to get there.